come around, please.
Morning. My name is Deborah. I just want to get some information.
Good morning. I am Odessa Duncan, Senior Environmental Officer. How may I assist you today?
Tell me something. They got this man next door by me breaking on this big building, and it's bare asbestos in the roof. I could remember hearing on your TV program that asbestos is dangerous to human health and the environment.
This is correct. The Environmental Protection Act states that any person or facility that is storing, treating, transporting, and or disposing of hazardous waste material must be authorized by the EPA to do so.
Oh, but it's now I'm really hearing about this hazardous waste thing. Tell me something more.
Hazardous waste are waste material with properties that are dangerous or capable of having a harmful effect on human health and the environment, including things like paint, fertilizers, and pesticides, waste oil, and asbestos. These things have the potential to cause cancer, birth defects, kidney failure, and reproductive impairment, with children being at the highest risk. The environmental authorization in this case gives the legal right to transport, store, and dispose of this material in accordance with the EPA Act Chapter 2005 Laws of Guyana. Now, this ensures you and your operation and your process is safe for the environment and human health.
So you mean to tell me that all them leftover Christmas paint that I got on in my kitchen sink, I need authorization from EPA to get rid of it?
No, Miss Deborah. These items, once used for household purposes, does not require environmental authorization from the EPA. However, you should still take necessary steps to ensure that these materials are stored and disposed of in an environmentally safe manner.
Thank you so much for the information. I go in and tell him that he needs an environmental authorization. Thank you.
Welcome to the Environment Matters, a monthly production of the Environmental Protection Agency in Guyana, where we highlight activities undertaken to fulfill our mandate of environmental protection and biodiversity conservation. This month, we will take a look at mining in Guyana and how EPA regulates that sector. Guyana is a country with abundant mineral wealth. In addition to its well-known deposits of gold, bauxite, and diamonds, Guyana's mineral heritage includes deposits of semi-precious stones such as amethyst, jasper, green quartz, and black pearl, and other minerals such as lithium, manganese, uranium, soapstone, among many others. In 2013, there were an estimated 17,363 persons employed in the sector, and in 2015, mining was the lead foreign exchange earner, responsible for a quarter of our country's gross domestic product. For the last decade, the sector, led by gold and diamond mining, was the largest single sector of the Guyanese economy, which of course has since been displaced by the oil and gas sector. With me today to discuss the EPA's role in the mining sector is Senior Environmental Officer and the head of the mining program area at the EPA, Ms. Felicia Adams Kelman.
Thank
Welcome.
you, Arita. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So let's get straight into our discussion when we talk about EPA's role in the mining sector. So tell us what activities are considered in managing the mining sector from EPA's standpoint.
So when we look at management of the sector, we look at the extraction of any mineral and the conversion of that mineral. So we look at sand mining, loam, quarrying, gold, diamond, and we even look at precious minerals. What we also do, because we recognize that within the sector, this is a value added operation, we would also authorize gold smelters and any of these facilities which burn the gold.
All right, so when you mentioned value added, my mind immediately went to the Green State Development Strategy, and it spoke about the need to have value added to our raw materials in order to diverse our economic sector. However, the business of the EPA is to ensure that any development projects do not have an adverse impact on the natural and social environment. So how do we go about doing this at the EPA? Tell us about the role of EPA in managing the sector.
So indeed, Arita, you clearly mentioned that our role is to protect the environment and ensure that these developmental activities do not cause any adverse impact to the environment. And so the EPA does this in 3 ways. So we do this through our authorization process, our complaints process, and our education and awareness programs. And if you just permit me, I can go through these 3 systems to just educate the public a bit more.
Yes, of course.
So in terms of our authorization process, what we do in this process is ensure that any mining operation is conform to environmental standards from the start to the end of this operation. And we do this through our permitting process. So what the permit does is it captures management conditions for air quality, water quality, noise, and any other potential impact that we see may be coming from this operation. That's the authorization process.
All right, and kindly allow me to also mention that the start of the authorization process that actually begins with a company or an individual submitting an application. So you must submit your application to start that process, and that of course the form is available for download on our website, and you'll see the necessary documents that are required, and of course you can visit our office to uplift a copy. So we continue on with the second part of our management.
All right, thank you for that inclusion, Arita. So the second part of our interaction with the mining sector is the investigation of complaints. So what would usually happen is if a member of the public feels that a mining activity is being undertaken without strict environmental safeguards, or it is causing some amount of pollution to their community, they can make a report to the agency. And they can report to us via telephone, email, or they can send in a letter stating what is being affected by the mining activity and some pertinent details that would allow us to locate the operation. Once we receive that information, we would conduct an investigation and we would determine the validity of the complaint and any actions that are required by the agency to mitigate the pollution. These actions can range from the issuance of fines, cleanup orders, and any other penalties described within our act.
Yes, and of course at the EPA we have a new system for complaints management. So that includes a 24-hour hotline number, as Felicia would have mentioned, as well as an email address that you can send your complaint to, and we also receive complaints on our Facebook and Instagram accounts, which we urge you to, of course, follow for updates and other news related to the agency. And our officers will record and investigate your complaints as they come in. And of course, information is required, name of the complainant, and the nature of that alleged pollution, and of course who you are alleging is doing the pollution.
Yes, correct. So the third and final way we interact with the miners is through our education awareness programs, where we try as far as possible to sensitize miners on best environmental management practices. And while some amount of guidance is provided through the two processes I just spoke about. We also have a program, area that would prepare brochures and educational materials for distribution to these mining operations. We also would do stakeholder consultations as necessary, and this is a part of our environmental authorization process. So all three of these methods are ways in which the EPA currently interacts with the mining sector.
Okay, and of course, the EPA, our motto is the environment is everybody's business. And we know that EPA also works along with other government and non-state actors to manage the sector, including the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, and of course those private sector agencies that represent miners, the GGDMA, GWMO, and I believe once we would have worked with the Ministry of Social Protection and the Guyana Mining School. And there are, of course, other agencies that are involved in the mining sector that EPA would work with from time to time. All right, so how many operations are being managed by the agency currently?
Currently, we have in excess of 150 operations being overseen by the agency, and that includes all the ones that I mentioned before: sand, gold, loam, quarrying.
All right. And so with that, we want to talk about some of the challenges that are faced by the agency in managing the sector. So let's have a discussion about some of that, because we often, I guess I should start that off by saying one of our biggest challenges is awareness, and people, claiming to not have heard about the EPA, people not understanding what the role of the agency is exactly. And that is exactly why we host this program, to bring awareness to you, the public, about what the agency is expected to do under the law. The Environmental Protection Act, of course, is the law that governs the agency and our associated regulations. And we also face a number of challenges, but we still get the job done. And so Felicia, tell us, for the mining sector, what are some of the challenges that you face?
So I really like, with all agencies, the EPA does face some amount of challenge, but what we try to do is to do some amount of internal review, so identify these challenges and then develop ways in which the EPA can overcome them in order to increase our efficiency in managing the sector.
Yes.
So with that being said, two of the main challenges that we currently face is our enforcement of permits, meaning that we have the Environmental Protection Act, and in that act there are breaches. However, what we find is that even to issue a fine, the money that's in the act is quite small. So the effectiveness of issuing these breaches and fines is something that we face as an agency. And what we have done thus far is have the legal team go through the act, and we are now looking to make revisions so as to improve our enforcement capabilities, not only in the mining sector but the other sectors throughout the agency.
Yes, so for those persons who have been following the EPA, you would know that we are in the process of internal review of the act, and of course once this would have been completed, we would take this to our stakeholders, including you, the public.
Yes.
So I would imagine that these fines should act as a deterrent to
the environmental pollution.
Yes, to environmental pollution. But of course, if the fines are paltry, then and we do know that mining, there's a lot of money involved in mining. So maybe the fines that are in the act do not necessarily reflect the current exchange rates and the current situation. So of course we will definitely have that included in the revision of the EP Act.
And so another main challenge that we face is the location of these operations. So apart from sand and loam, which are quite accessible given that most of them are located along the highway, what we find is that the gold, quarrying, and these other minerals are located in the interior locations. So sometimes access for the agency to do relevant monitoring is a challenge, and especially in certain circumstances where it's an emergency and we need to get in there immediately to do our assessment. So that's another challenge that we face at EPA. And in order to do this, the EPA has been opening sub-offices throughout the country, and we currently have one in Region 6 and Region 10.
Yes, and definitely we have in the pipelines plans to establish satellite offices in every administrative region of the country. And you did mention, yes, we, in addition to our headquarters at Ganji Street, Sophia, we also have satellite offices in Linden as well as WIM in Region 6. And we are currently in the process of establishing our offices in Region 2 at Anna Regina and in Region 9 at Lethem. And of course the other agencies that are involved in the sector, particularly the GTMC, they would have sub-offices in those mining districts, and so the EPA will soon follow that pattern to ensure that enforcement is done on a more immediate basis. And not just enforcement, but also investigation of complaints as well. And
and those right now are the two main challenges being faced by the agency in terms of managing the sector. And as I said before, we continuously do internal reviews so that if other challenges arise, we would try to develop ways in which to address them, as we currently doing for these two that I listed.
yes, and also permit me to mention that it is within our strategic plan to double or triple, I believe, the number of staff in the agency, which will better allow for us to manage the sector. Because of course, I know most state agencies would complain of not having enough manpower. And then when we talk about the geography of Guyana, I don't think people have that appreciation or the grasp for how vast our landscape is, right? So with that, we will take our first ad break and we'll get right back to discussing mining in Guyana. Are you involved in a business or thinking about starting one? Do you know there may be environmental impacts from business activities? According to the Environmental Protection Act of 1996, businesses such as gas stations, rice mills, large-scale agriculture and poultry farms, large-scale mining and forestry operations, hotels, and resorts must be authorized. Persons proposing any of these activities need to submit an application for environmental authorization to the EPA. Attention all miners. Mining is important to Guyana's development, and so is our biodiversity. Practice smart mining. Use a retort, dispose of your waste properly, manage your tailings well, and reclaim mined out areas. Remember, improper mining is a threat to your health, biodiversity, and a hindrance to prosperity. A message from the Environmental Protection Agency and Ministry of Natural Resources with funding from JEF through the United Nations.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do. Dispose of waste in a garbage bin. Clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly. Take a reusable shopping bag to the market. Support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste. Plant a kitchen garden, trees, and flowers. Compost your organic waste. Conserve water and electricity. Carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganji Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epagana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.
Welcome back to the Environment Matters. In this episode, we are discussing mining in Guyana. And before our ad break, we talked about mining and the role of EPA in that sector. In this part of the show, we'll have a discussion on the Minimata Convention. So with me, of course, is Miss Felicia Adams Kelman, who will continue that discussion in talking about the Minimata Convention.
The Minimata Convention on Mercury is an international treaty which was established to protect people and the environment from harm caused by the exposure to mercury. And so the impacts of mercury really came to the forefront in the 1950s to 1968, where in Minimata, which is a city in Japan, the community members were exposed to severe mercury poisoning from industrial wastewater discharge. So what happened was this wastewater, it contained metal mercury, which is a very toxic form of mercury. It got into their water system within the Minimata Bay, and then the fishes within that system would have ingested the metal mercury. So that when the locals fished, because that was their source of food, and ingested the fish, they became poisoned over this 10-year period by the fish that was contaminated with mercury. And so these persons in Japan, they suffered severe disablements, some even died. And so this is really the genesis of why talks surrounded the establishment of the Minimata Convention on Mercury.
Yeah, and you know, it's very uncanny that the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency was also centered around an incident of pollution in mining. So we can clearly see how important it is to have a body established to ensure that activities do not have a negative impact on the environment and to monitor development activities. Yes. And that process that you spoke about, where the environment is polluted and then we consume things within the environment, and this in turn harms us, that's called bioaccumulation. So sometimes we as citizens, as corporate entities, we dispose of our waste in a wanton manner, and we figure, out of sight, out of mind. Once I throw it away, it has nothing to do with me. But then these things end up impacting us in some way or the other. And so we need to be very mindful of our actions, whether it's on the individual level, the household level, and, in our business activities as well.
Yes, that is so true.
So we would have established, what led to the drafting of the Minimata Convention. So tell us, when did Guyana sign on to this convention, and why did we do it in the first place?
All right, so I think we all know that Guyana has always been a champion for the environment and its protection. And so the country recognized that while efforts were being made to manage the use of mercury, what we realized is that some amount of formal actions needed to be taken to ensure that the environment is not degraded further or there's no impact to the livelihood of people. And so with that, the government decided to sign the convention on the date. It was formally adopted actually on October 10th, 2013, and then they ratified it on September 24th, 2014.
All right, so we talk about international environmental agreements, MEAs, as we know it, and of course there is a unit within the EPA that deals with MEAs that are related to biodiversity, but this one is specially related to mining. And so of course the state agencies that are involved in mining would have come together to form a national group to deal with that. We'll talk about that in a bit, of course. But the difference between signature and ratification lies in your obligations. So when you, as a country, sign on to this convention, it means that yes, we agree with the things that are listed in this convention. We as a country agree that mercury exposure is harmful to humans, it's harmful to the natural environment. We agree that steps should be taken and so forth. And when we ratify that document, it means that whatever provisions are in there, our country is somewhat legally bound to implement and to uphold. So it means then that steps have to be taken to ensure that you comply with the different provisions under the Minimata Convention, right? And so with that, what exactly are our obligations as a country under that convention?
That is an excellent question because, as you say, a lot of times Guyana would sign on to MEAs, but the general public has no idea of what the obligations are for Guyana in terms of when they sign. So in 2016, a study was done to see exactly where mercury was being used in Guyana, because as we know, mercury is found in other things. Mercury can be found in light bulbs, thermometer, and the convention covers all of these products. But specifically for Guyana, we wanted to know where the mercury was being used and where it was being channeled. And that study found that the small and medium scale mining sector was the main user of mercury, and they use it particularly in their amalgamation process to extract the gold from the ore. So once that was established, the convention then provided specific obligations to Guyana, because this is where our mercury is coming from.
Yes.
So Article 7 of the convention then says that Guyana is obligated to reduce and eliminate, where feasible, the use of mercury and mercury compounds within the mining sector. So in a nutshell, that is what we are obligated to do. How do we do this? We have to, as well, mandated by the convention, develop a national action plan to address the phased reduction and elimination of mercury from within this mining sector. So in a nutshell, that is the general obligation for Guyana under this convention.
Okay. The Ministry of Natural Resources is the national focal point for the Minimata Convention, and of course there are other state entities, as we would have mentioned earlier. Now, the focal point is the body that is responsible for reporting to the convention what actions have been taken to comply in that regard. Now, EPA, as the lead environmental regulator, is a part of that national body that we mentioned earlier, that is responsible for executing activities to ensure that our country fulfills its obligations. Can you tell us about some of the activities that would have been conducted so far?
So yes, as you mentioned, EPA is one of the key stakeholders of the national working group that was established to basically guide the development of the National Action Plan and to harmonize efforts of all these different sector agencies that have a responsibility for mining. So in that regard, EPA has undertaken some individual activities towards contributing to this overall reduction and elimination of mercury. One of these activities is the drafting of mercury standards for emissions and releases of mercury. So persons may ask, well, if we're trying to eliminate mercury, why are we drafting standards? But this elimination will occur over a phased period. So in the interim, the EPA has to ensure that whatever is being released or emitted into the environment is done at a level that will not impact people or the environment. So we have taken on the responsibility to draft these guidelines for the implementation while we're developing this phased plan for reduction. The second activity that we have been involved in is actually the signature of a tri-party MOU that was between EPA, GGMC, and Pesticide and Toxic Chemical Control Board. And what this MOU does is regulate the importation of mercury. So we're trying to not stop, but just control how much mercury is coming into the country at the time, so that when we reach a stage to actually eliminate mercury, we have a clear understanding of quantities that are in Guyana, where these quantities are, how they're being used. And so the role that EPA plays in that is to ensure that persons that store the mercury have a secure facility to store the mercury, so it's not in a residential area or any other area that could be severely impacted if, Lord forbid, an incident happens.
Yes.
We also ensure that they have adequate management plans, so spill management plans for the facility that is storing mercury. So that is another role we have been playing in terms of the implementation of the convention. Finally, I would like to mention that EPA also sits on a number of expert committees, and when I say expert committees, this is not just local, but it is a committee with members of countries that have also signed on to the convention. And what we do at these high-level meetings is draft guidelines and documents that can be shared with all member countries to the convention that would help them better manage mercury in their country. So we have been very active in that regard as it relates to the implementation of the convention.
All right, so before we wrap up, I'd like to put you on the spot a bit, and just so our audience has a little understanding, the difference between release and emission when you talked about the draft guidelines for mercury release and emission.
So in the simplest terms, release would speak to discharge of liquids into the environment, so via pipes, drains, etc. And when we say emissions, it's really related to air quality.
Okay.
So emissions of mercury or mercury vapor via stacks from an operation. So that's basically the distinction between emissions and releases.
All right. And so with that, we wrap up our discussion on mercury, on the Minimata Convention, on mining and EPA's role in the mining sector. Closing remarks, Felicia?
Well, as mentioned earlier, EPA is everybody's business, and EPA is mandated, I want to repeat, to authorize any extraction of mineral and conversion of this mineral. I want to reiterate that the environment is everybody's business, and all persons have a responsibility to ensure that they're doing their part. So if you know that you are an operation that requires authorization from the agency, I would implore you to come in and have a discussion with myself or any of the other environmental officers, so we can see how we can bring you into compliance with our act and regulations for the overall betterment of Guyana as a whole.
Yes, and of course, bringing operations into compliance has been a major focus of the EPA for the past year and a half. And with that, we come to the end of our show. Remember to get authorized. Submit your application for environmental authorization. If you are starting a new business, the environment is everybody's business. Remember to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for this and more videos. Remember, we are also on radio. We are in the newspapers. Be sure to pick up your copy of the Sunday Chronicle and the Guyana Times. And More importantly, the ban on single-use plastics is set to commence in 2021. So ensure that you make that switch today. Living an eco-friendly lifestyle is not hard. And of course, stay updated for more news on the ban. And with that, I thank you very much for joining us.
Gosh,
Miss Sonia.
morning, Miss Cheryl. I'm late for work.
I noticed the other day y'all had a big campaign with them police officers, so shutting down them people barbecue, wedding, dance. Man, how y'all expect these people to make money and survive?
Oh, Miss Cheryl, that is far from the truth. The EPA and the Guyana Police Force are actually working together to ensure that persons who conduct certain businesses and activities are authorized. We've tried to allow them to adhere to the noise regulations.
Well, there's gonna be a new law. What law is this?
These laws were always in place. It's now that we're getting all these complaints at the agency, we are trying to enforce them. The Environmental Protection Act has been in place since 1996, and it states that persons and businesses must apply for environmental authorization before operating a sound-making device.
Well, girl, I never know this thing is prior to the law.
So if you're keeping a barbecue or an open-air function, like a wedding or a concert, especially in your community, right, and you're playing a music system, you have to apply for a short-term noise permit. And for persons that operate in a business and you got generators and stuff, you have to apply for a long-term permit. And that is applicable to bars and hotspots and clubs also.
Well, now that you explain it, I understand it. It's unfair to the elderly, sick people, and even them little children.
That is correct. According to the World Health Organization, loud noise can cause stress, sleep deprivation, and hearing impairment, and I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you for explaining it, Miss Sonia.
For more information, you can contact the EPA at 225-5471 or visit our office at Ganji Street, North Sophia, Georgetown.
Have you ever heard of biodiversity? Biodiversity is a short way of saying biological diversity and is the variety of life on Earth. Think of biodiversity as a web of life in which humans, animals, plants, and microorganisms rely on each other. Biodiversity is usually explored at three levels: genes, species, and ecosystems. Each individual species has genes, which are the source of its different features. For instance, each person has a different face and body because of the uniqueness in our genes. Biodiversity is also present in different species, that is, the variety of living things which can reproduce. On our way to work, school, or the store each day, we see different species of animals, like horses, cows, insects, and trees like hibiscus, pawpaw, or mango. These varieties of species live in many different types of habitats, including forests, mountains, savannas, rivers, or wetlands. Therefore, biodiversity is all around us. According to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, Guyana's country profile has about 8,000 species of plants and 1,850 known species of fishes, amphibians, birds, reptiles, and mammals. Did you know that failure to manage the practices of our agricultural, gold, diamond, and bauxite industries can cause harmful chemicals to seep into groundwater and or make their way into rivers and lakes used by neighboring communities? Our industrial waste is another pollutant that poses a threat to biodiversity, since the act of dumping the waste can pollute our rivers and other water bodies by the release of harmful chemicals. Also, overharvesting of fishes, animals, medicinal plants, overlogging and overgrazing animals on the land poses serious threats to biodiversity, since it means that we are using these resources faster than they can be replaced or reproduced. If we want to protect our country's biodiversity, we need to understand that humans rely on plants, animals, and all other living things as much as they rely on us. In fact, Guyana's biodiversity is considered mostly intact, but if we are not careful, our environments can be destroyed. For instance, this stack of blocks, with each block representing a plant, animal, human, microorganism, or fungi, are stacked to represent our environments. Let's say we remove one block. There isn't a major shift in the whole structure, but if more and more blocks are removed, meaning animals go extinct or plants die, the greater the impact will be on our structure. How can we protect our country's biodiversity? At the national level, Guyana signed on to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992, which was ratified in 1994. You may ask, what is the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity? A convention is an agreement on the environment between more than two countries. Such an agreement guides global, regional, and national action on environmental issues. Therefore, the UNCBD is an agreement between more than two countries on biodiversity, and it guides global, regional, and our national action on biodiversity. Since signing the convention, the national focal point, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, has worked towards the protection and sustainable use of biodiversity. You may ask, what is a focal point? A focal point is an agency which is responsible for coordinating implementation of a convention at the national level. The EPA has implemented a national biodiversity strategy and action plan, the mainstreaming of biodiversity, and is continually working to achieve the MEA. The work of EPA is complemented by organizations such as the Protected Areas Commission, Iwokrama International Center for Rainforest Conservation and Development, World Wildlife Fund Guyana Country Office, Conservation International Guyana, and the Guyana Marine Conservation Society, to name a few. Here are ways you can help to protect Guyana's biodiversity. Become an advocate for biodiversity. Plant trees instead of concreting your yard. Form a group to clean up a beach, drain, or trench, or streets in your community. To learn more about how you can protect Guyana's biodiversity, call or visit the Environmental Protection Agency.
A message from the Ministry of the Presidency, Department of Environment, Global Environment Facility, and the United Nations Development Programme.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do: dispose of waste in a garbage bin, clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly, take a reusable shopping bag to the market, support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste, plant a kitchen garden, trees and flowers, compost your organic waste, conserve water and electricity, carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganji Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epagana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.